Listen, if you grew up watching wild, rubber-faced comedians on late-night TV, you already think you know Jim Carrey. But you don't. Not the whole man. What you saw on screen was a force of nature, a carnival hurricane that made you howl and cringe in the same breath. Behind that hurricane was a kid who slept in a van, a son who watched his father mop factory floors after losing a job, and a man who carried a terror so deep it shaped every laugh he ever gave. He was born January 17, 1962, in Newmarket, Ontario. Youngest of 4, in a house where jokes were survival and money was fiction. Percy Carey, a sax player turned accountant, had the kind of quiet dignity that breaks a heart when it collapses. When Titan Wheels closed its doors, Percy went from desk to janitor, from respect to shame, and the family slid into a yellow camper by Lake Ontario. Picture your hero, maybe even your neighbor, sleeping in a van while frost lines the sleeping bags. Jim, at 13, found refuge in making faces in a mirror, turning misery into mimicry. He mailed Carol Burnett a fan letter at 10 and taped the reply on his wall like scripture. By 15, he was performing small sets and scrounging for change. By 16, he dropped out of school and worked nights, waking to go to high school half asleep, wearing other kids' scorn as a second skin. Laughter became armor, and he wore it until it bled. In 1982, the family's nightmare nearly ended in tragedy. Percy swallowed pills. Jim found him unconscious. They saved him by minutes. That image, the father on the floor, a bottle of pills nearby, stayed with Jim forever. It became the pulse beneath every manic gesture, the dark clock ticking behind the smile. He never forgot that the man who kept the family together had wanted to end it. Jim's fear of that same darkness, of becoming the sort of empty, he ran on dread and determination. And that pressure pushed his performance into that electric, unpredictable place we couldn't look away from. His early career reads like a stubborn, bruised hymn to persistence. He bombed at Yuck Yucks, slept on couches, survived on free food, and kept going until Rodney Dangerfield saw him and invited him on tour. He was still scrapping when he landed on In Living Color, but Carrey's success was never clean. It was messy, loud, and expensive. He used his body like a living prop, gaining and losing weight overnight, smashing into furniture, breaking bones, and improvising until crews wept. Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, that blistering streak in 1994 annexed the box office and made his face synonymous with a certain lawless joy. But the price was written on his body and soul. He admitted later he was using cocaine, Adderall, Valium. He hallucinated on press junkets and still returned to the set the next day because the machine demanded it. Then something else happened. One of those rare flips where a comedian becomes a mirror people don't expect to look into. The Truman Show. Filmed in monstrous storm tank conditions, Carrey pushed so far he nearly drowned in the storm sequence. He refused to leave the set afterward because he wanted Truman's isolation to be real. For the first time, audiences didn't laugh. They watched a man unravel and find truth. Carrey won awards, but the suits and dollar signs didn't fix what was inside. That pattern, mania and art, collapse and reinvention keeps repeating. He turned Andy Kaufman into a crusade in Man on the Moon, losing 40 pounds and staying in character off camera until friends and co-stars begged for breaks. He tortured himself for art and sometimes for control. He once admitted there was no me, that fame had peeled him into nothingness. In 2017, he said, blunt as a sermon, that the self he'd been chasing dissolved under meditation and art. He painted furiously and searched for something beyond applause. Drama trailed him. Marriages failed. Lawsuits piled up. A terrifying personal tragedy, Catherine White's death and the allegations that followed, stained him, even if courts dismissed claims. His daughter's distance, the legal battles, the tabloid feeds, these are the rent he paid for a life lived loudly. And yet the man never stopped performing. He returned, time after time, when money and craft called. Sonic brought him back for $30 million. Sonic 3 printed scripts in gold to entice him. It was show business on its most shameless terms. He joked about buying things, but underneath was a man who admitted Prozac and therapy had been lifelong realities. A man who called his depression low-level despair that just never went away. What I want you to understand, listen close, is that Jim Carrey's chaos was not an act you could neatly separate from his truth. The manic energy in Ace Ventura had an origin. A kid who performed to survive. The greeting center of The Truman Show had been carved by a son who watched his father try to leave this world. The pain never left. It found forms to feed. Sometimes those forms were genius. Sometimes they were self-destruction. He broke and rebuilt himself in public. He dressed as Lloyd Christmas and smashed his face into the screen. And then later, in Eternal Sunshine, he stripped himself of any mask to raw, aching effect. He chased perfection, and it nearly killed him. He used medication. He quit medication. He chose to feel rather than numb. He told the world that being rich and famous didn't fix anything. That line is simple and brutal. Everyone should get rich and famous just to learn that it doesn't fix anything. If you remember Jim as a harmless, cartoonish lightning bolt, I want you to remember the boy in the van, the father on the bathroom floor, the man who nearly drowned for a perfect take, the performer whose art and pain braided together so tightly you can't separate them. He is both the joke and the wound. So before you laugh at the next Jim Carrey clip you watch, hold that image. A grown man who kept on pretending because the alternative terrified him. That trembling behind the smile is where the real story lives. That is the truth we never wanted to believe about our clowns, that they are humane, fragile, and often more haunted than the scariest villain on screen. Now, picture yourself with a cup of tea in the evening, the house quiet, the world scrolling by. We are the generation that cheered for Carrey, bought the lunchboxes, argued about his jokes around kitchen tables. This is not nostalgia for its own sake. It is a request. Pay attention. Don't let the noise of modern life swallow the cost of a life that gave you laughter,